Have you ever wondered how is it possible that bullying and incivility still exists in workplaces? I mean, we are all professional, we've worked so hard to get to where we are, and yet we can still treat each other with a lack of kindness and respect. And we all know it is not good, right? It impacts our relationships and reduces collaboration and all of those things. Well, this is why I wanted to have this conversation with an amazing internationally renowned expert, Renee Thompson. Renee actually specializes in helping healthcare organizations. However, we all know it is across industries, across organizations, across teams. And so I know you're going to have so much value from Renee. In fact, if you're thinking, do I really need to dive into this whole bullying and civility thing? I've got a lot going on in my plate. I invite you to think right now of somebody in your history, in your past, who has been bullying or who is engaged in bullying or incivility with you. Think about that person for a second. Now notice what happens to your body. Do you remember that person's name? You're getting sweaty, you all of a sudden feel something. See, that is what I invite you to channel into this conversation, because we're going to learn so much from Renee. And I don't want it to just be up here. I want you to feel how important this issue is. So thank you so much, Renee, for being here and for dedicating your career to such an important cultural change that we need to make.
Well, thank you, Sarah, for even being willing to engage in a conversation about this. It's such a big problem, but for the longest time, we've just ignored it and said things like, well, that's just the way it is here, and haven't really done our due diligence to address it, because talk about feelings, it is so uncomfortable to actually call somebody on their behavior. It's easier to address performance, and especially, my world is healthcare, their clinical performance, but it's altogether different when you have to talk to somebody about their behavior. And I'm just thrilled for the opportunity just to have a conversation about this, because it's a huge problem, humongous.
Yeah. And to your point around it's easier to talk about performance and outcomes and objectives, what else do you think contributes to why bullying and incivility can go on for so long and then not get addressed until it's like a crisis level, proportions?
It's a great question. And I spend a lot of time taking a look at, why is it so prevalent? Why do we all know it happens, yet nobody's doing anything about it? And at least in my world in healthcare, we actually see more bullying and incivility, more disruptive behaviors in healthcare, the caring industry, than any other industry in the world. And you might think, how could that be? Well, we also have the most stressful jobs in the world, especially think about the pandemic. Everybody else was at home doing their work, and healthcare employees were actually, as they say, running into the burning building while everyone else was running out. And caring for those types of patients, it's the unpredictability, the life and death situations. When people are burned out and stressed out, they lash out. And who do they lash out? They lash out to each other. And so we see so many disruptive behaviors when you have any industry that's high stress. And also we look at this, one of the other reasons is, especially in organizations where people have been there for a really long time, well, that's just the way it is here. That's just the way he is or she is. Don't let anything they say to you, don't take it personally, especially if that person is a high performer. We're less likely to address their behavior, and people become numb, and they've actually normalized deviant behaviors. And then the last reason that I'll mention, and there are others, we have not done a good job equipping those frontline leaders, those managers, with the skills and tools that they need to actually set behavioral expectations, confront their employees who are misbehaving, and hold people accountable for behavior, especially now in this great resignation. I think about the people who I serve, it's the healthcare industry. It's those frontline nurse leaders who have said to me, well, a bad nurse is better than no nurse. So now we're even more likely to just ignore it or justify it. And so that's why you see this rise, this uptick in bad behavior.
And we could so easily say the bad nurse, like label people, and then it's
Oh,
this binary, right? Then and that's where the recognition or lack thereof comes in. Is
right.
now we've labeled somebody according to their behaviors as opposed to their greatness, their potential, their possibilities. And then how motivated is somebody to change your mind when we keep addressing you as the problem? Have you seen that
Right.
in your work?
Oh, all the time. We demonize people for their behavior. And you know what I find really fascinating? I always hear this type of situation when especially when I first start working with a leader. They'll tell me about that one employee who has been behaving badly for decades. And
Mm-hmm.
when I ask the question, has anyone sat down and had an honest and respectful conversation about this person's behavior? And it could be a conversation. You give really good clinical care. You're an excellent clinician. You're an excellent, fill in the blank. This is what you do well. However, the way you treat people is not okay. And here's what I never want to see from you again, and have that honest conversation. Nobody has. And I think to myself, how many of these people who are misbehaving, if you actually had the courage to sit down and talk to them about their behavior, how many of them would say, oh my gosh, I had no idea I was coming across that way. I
Yeah.
don't want to be perceived as the bully. I don't want to be perceived this way. And then work with that person to change. Now, I am going to tell you, there are a lot of people, they know exactly what they're doing. Okay. And that's not what I'm talking about. But at least
Yeah.
to engage in a conversation with them. Because to your point, we just demonize them and label them without reaching out and saying, like, this is a problem. It's affecting everyone. Let's talk about this. Mm-hmm.
And then we remove all the opportunities and have for perhaps that 20-year period to recognize and reward and acknowledge the things we want to see more of. So we
Right.
get more of the things we pay attention to. So we get more of
Right.
the negative behavior, we get more of the toxicity because the one or two people's behavior can now start to sort of toxify that environment.
Right.
And then I noticed this phenomenon that happens where we begin to say, well, why isn't somebody doing something about this? And they feel it should be the owner or the leader or HR or insert the blank. Have you noticed that same sort of behavior is that at some point it's sort of we start pointing fingers away
Oh,
from, what's happening and where it's happening on the ground floor?
right. Oh my gosh. Yes, all the time. And one of my favorite examples is one of the leaders I was working with reached out to me and she said, okay, I was just in a situation. I don't think I handled it well. Here's what happened. What would you suggest? There was one of her really good clinicians, her employee, it was in a critical care department, who said to her, complained to her about the incompetence of his coworker and all the things that he saw she was doing wrong. And the manager said, well, did you say something to her? And he said, no, that's management's job. That's your job. And she said, okay, I didn't know what to say. I said, oh, this is a good one.
Yeah.
I said, there's a principle that we use. Anytime you can agree with someone, agree with them, no matter what, if it doesn't matter how small. If you can agree, because it disarms them, because they're waiting for you to defend yourself. But if you can agree, agree. So I said to her, all right, if this happens again, say, you're right. It is management's job in a low performing, dysfunctional team.
Mm-hmm.
But in a high performing, cohesive, strong professional team, it's everybody's responsibility to hold each other accountable for their performance and their behavior.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Because you're right. They just want somebody else to fix the problem without realizing that they're part of the solution too. And by ignoring something that's either, again, affects the team in any way, whether it's performance, service, behavior, that they're contributing to the problem too.
Mm-hmm. And I wonder if we, the more people get comfortable with the agree, that's almost that yes and sort of philosophy,
Mm-hmm.
that solution focused philosophy.
Right.
Once people get comfortable with that, we can then level up that with agree and acknowledge. So when you can acknowledge and recognize somebody's greatness, even when they are not at their best, either they're in that particular environment or on that particular day or shift or with that particular patient. And of course, those of you who are watching this from other industries, in the context that you're in, imagine we could say, yes, you're right. It is the responsibility of so-and-so, and it's also our responsibility. And I just want to acknowledge in this moment, because that's the other thing that disarms.
Yeah.
When we acknowledge somebody, it takes all the oxygen out of the air of incivility. So imagine if we had abundant acknowledgement of what was working rather than a hyper narrow fixation on what wasn't.
Yep. It's so interesting. One of the techniques that I share with my leaders all the time, because leaders will tell me, oh my gosh, as soon as I walk into work, people will hit me with complaint after complaint about this person, that person. So one of my techniques is I tell them, say this when somebody's starting to complain about one of their coworkers or something in the department. I'll say, whoa, wait a minute. I'm willing to listen to you complain, but you have to tell me one good thing first. Tell me one good thing about this person first. And then I'll listen to you. Okay. And they're like, what? Or tell me one good thing that happened last night or that happened today. It's forcing people to also see that not everything is bad. And even if somebody like this person that this clinician was complaining about, she's still doing some things well, but we're so quick to point out what's wrong instead of pointing out what's right. So forcing people to actually take a step back and say, okay, there were a couple of good things that happened, and to do that instead of just going right to the complaining all the time.
What a beautiful example of a soft accountability mechanism, because that's the other thing that we hear a lot about is, well, when somebody is behaving in an inappropriate way, who's holding them accountable, which I think might get to the finger pointing. And what you've just really demonstrated the power of the, agree, and also add another A of, accountability there. So yes, I want to hear your complaint and I need to hear it. We that's one of the things is we can't make people feel like we don't want to hear them, because that's not acknowledging.
Oh,
yes, I want to hear.
Absolutely.
And I want to hear in the context of this, there's other things that are working, which also deflates the energy for complaints. And instead of complaints, a poorly worded request, you've given a very specific formula for leaders to invite people to find something to acknowledge. What's the poorly worded request? Because I bet you that's the other thing they're pointing out. It's something that they value, something that they really like. Promptness, accountability, competence, so whatever they choose to acknowledge works, allows the leader to take a step back, take a breath, pull in, listen to what they choose to acknowledge, because that may be an actual hint, I bet, to why that thing bothers them so much about that other person, to pull apart what is bullying and incivility and what are other things that need to be addressed and identified. What do you think about the whole intertangling of issues that can happen that we blanketly label as incivility and bullying?
Well, I always say this: you shouldn't have to be a psychiatrist to work with people. Okay.
Yes.
But it certainly helps if you understand psychology and human behavior, because to your point, there's always something underneath those complaints. And I think sometimes somebody just wants to be heard. They may not feel that they're getting the attention that they need. So they know that if they complain to their boss, especially, they'll get their boss's attention. And that may not be what they really need from their boss. They may need their boss to recognize them in some other way, or to give them positive attention in some other way. But I think, and you know this, Sarah, as human beings, we default to the negative all the time. But there are multiple layers here, especially when I take a look at some people and their behaviors and how those behaviors show up. We've said many times, everybody has a story. You don't know what somebody's life is like before they come in the door, but we're so quick to judge people. And you had mentioned about, bullying and incivility. We tend to label all bad behavior bullying.
Yes.
And that is so far from the truth. I actually, when I go into organizations, I don't find a lot of true bullying. What I find mostly is incivility, and there's a difference. And
let's talk about
I'd love to share the difference, because it's just so incredibly important especially if you're committed to reducing incidents and addressing this. So when we look at bullying, there's actually not a legal definition for bullying in this country. We have a legal definition for harassment and discrimination, but not for bullying. However, most of us experts, we tend to agree on this definition. It's basically the repeated patterns of disruptive behavior with a conscious or unconscious attempt to do harm. Okay. When somebody reaches out to me and they say, I think I'm being bullied, I'm looking for three things. So one, there has to be a target. Let's say I'm fine with everyone else, but Sarah, there's something about you that I don't like. You're too smiley. Okay. You're too nice all the time. You're too positive. I've heard people say this. Oh, she's so nice. She's too nice. Like, oh my gosh. So I'm fine with everyone else, but I've targeted you. The second is that the behavior has to be harmful. Things like eye rolling and ticking and sighing, they're not really nice. We know that, but they're by themselves, they're not harmful. But if I don't give you information that you need to be successful in your job deliberately to sabotage you or to watch you fail, that's harmful, especially in healthcare. That could be harmful to a patient, to someone's mom or child or, okay. And then the third criteria to be considered bullying is that it has to be repeated over time. It can't be one time I get testy with you in a crisis situation when I'm under stress, because let's face it, we can all get testy with each other. And so that's bullying. There has to be a target, the behavior is harmful, and it has to be repeated. Incivility, very different. It's all that low level, inconsiderate. It's the mocking, the eye rolling, the gossiping, the I help the people I like, I don't help the people I don't like, the favoritism, the exclusion that we see. A lot of that is incivility. Now, if you can actually show somebody's bullying, usually that's a slam dunk. I bet you have a policy about that. Incivility, not so easy, because incivility is culture, and culture does not change overnight.
Yeah. And really, for those of us who, again, like your point around, if you have to be a psychiatrist, then, that's a pretty intense workplace you have to be in. Similarly, you don't have to be a work psychologist to be able to figure out what is it that motivates or demotivates people at work. Right. I think what I've just pulled from that conversation, that discussion, is we need to be able to talk about what's really going on. And right. You don't need to be an organizational industrial psychologist to be able to describe that. I think what you did a beautiful job of saying, what are the things that I'm noticing? And that's perhaps one of the ways in which leaders can empower their teams to be part of the solution. What are you noticing? We often we don't want to know, or we're afraid that's kind of open the floodgates. Well, actually that dampens the stuff that can go underground. And that's, I'm willing to bet that it's when things go underground and that you mentioned earlier about the 20 years of behavior happening. Mm-hmm. It didn't happen yesterday. So what's been boiling and bubbling underneath the surface that perhaps has created this pattern of bullying, or that potentially could? Well, my curiosity that I would love to ask you about is, when you've noticed a team that things could be boiling and bubbling, when you've noticed that there is a lot of culture in there that is incivility oriented, how does recognition show up or not show up in civil workplaces? Yep.
Well, one of the things that I see clearly between those departments, and I'm speaking about healthcare, and most of my clients are in hospitals. Okay. So these are acute care facilities. We do a lot with ambulatory care too, but I'm just comparing the department that they don't need my help, and the department that the chief nursing officer or human resource director is calling me, oh my gosh, we need your help to work with this department. Recognition in the team that's doing well is a habit.
Yes.
It is a habit that they recognize each other, that they support each other, that they go out of their way to help each other, that they truly see themselves as a team, that they are also willing to give and receive feedback, okay, to help each other improve, that they have a trusting relationship, they know the purpose, and recognition, again, is a habit. In the department that is dysfunctional, that they need my help, recognition is almost unheard of. What I find is there's a quickness to criticize, to complain, and very little attempts to recognize each other. And here's a mistake, and I know you know this, being the expert. Some people think recognition is bringing in pizza for people.
Yeah.
That's not the type of recognition. I mean, I love food, and you can bring
That's
me
a reward. That's recognition. Yes.
That's not what we're talking about when we're talking about recognition. So recognition is a habit in the departments that actually don't have the incivility and the bullying that other departments have.
Pizza can immediately squash your hunger, but it doesn't make you healthy. And what you're talking about, I mean, that's the name of your organization, right? So, health has to be what we're focusing on the long game. And nowhere in that, though, that beautiful example that you provided of, contrasting the two teams, which is actually a really helpful strategy, by the way, for those of you who are leaders and business owners and you're wondering, how do I gain perspective on this? Do some of that, not comparison, right? Like pitting.
Right. It's not a competition, right?
Right. Get some, some perspective on whether it be relationships and teams, so that you can see that. Yeah. And what I didn't hear in there is that it was the leader's job to create one or the other. That person is a key anchor in that.
Absolutely.
However, feedback and collaboration and recognition, the way you described it, I heard it as it's everyone's job, because everyone wants to work in a healthy, positive, collaborative, respectful work environment. And therefore, why would anybody want to give over the responsibility and all the fun and joy and meaning that comes from creating and contributing to that healthy environment?
Right. You're so right. And it isn't, the leader is the anchor. However, it's everyone's responsibility. And when we look at culture exists right now. Everybody's current culture, it exists the way it is right now. It's based on the behaviors that you've encouraged, the behaviors that you've ignored. It's been built piece by piece over time, depending on every single person in that department, not just the leader.
So as we begin to wrap up, let's also put this in context. We know very well, and by the way, for those of you who are watching, I'm coming from Canada and our lovely Renee is coming from the US. And so we've got, when we say, our, just so that you're kind of aware, we have a cross North America wide perspective here, but a lot of similar gaps in terms of legislation that can guide us in this practice. Although our accreditation standards here in Canada very clearly demonstrate that you need to have, if you're in healthcare, you need to have some provisions. Certainly in Ontario, which is where I'm from, Bill 168, you have a duty to protect and create a psychologically and physically safe workplace. And so, if there's no other, reason you need to do something about, if you're worried about true bullying, now that you know the definition from Renee, it is your responsibility. So all of that said, let's dial it back to the current context of what life is like. It's heavy right now. It's, not just in healthcare, it's heavy everywhere. And of course, when it's heavy everywhere, going right back to healthcare, those patients and family members are all the more, sort of struggling and perhaps not as patient and so forth. So let's pull it back and let's give from the deepest, most generous place of compassion and support, because I know that that's your natural orientation. What do you want to say to people who would believe in everything we're saying, but they just feel so worn down that they wonder, do I even have it in me to do anything other than get to work, log on, or, care for a patient, or whatever that type of work is? What advice would you have if your environment has incivility and yet you are burnt out, compassion fatigue, stressed, exhausted, dealing with your own mental health challenges, perhaps? What's your advice for folks?
I always start with remembering why I'm doing this work first. If you don't have a good why in times where things are great, not great, okay, it will always affect you. You will never feel as good doing your work, even in good times, if you don't know your why. And I know for some of us, that's a struggle. If you're not in healthcare where there's this I'm saving lives type of thing, like even in my world, I'm a nurse, but I'm not caring for patients anymore. So it's getting really clear on what why am I getting up every single day or at night to do this work, and having some purpose to your work. And then I like to think in terms of start small. Maybe I don't have it in me to tackle my entire department or my entire office, but can I start trying to build a better relationship with one person I work with? Can I do one thing each day to make it a little better for the person who I work with all the time? And I think, just like recycling or any of these other things, like what difference is it going to make? And I will not do the starfish story, okay? But can I do one thing today to make it better for someone else? And you know this, Sarah, by doing that, and I get a greater gift in return. But it always has to start with why. Like, why are you here? Why are you in doing the work that you're doing? What's the real purpose of your work? Know that, and makes it easier to actually get up every day and do that work. Because it's funny. I mean, my whole world is bullying and incivility. That's a heavy burden to carry every day. I have people reaching out to me every day telling me their horrific stories. There are times I've said to my husband several times, I don't know that I could do this anymore. Oh my gosh, this work is so hard. And then I remember, if it was easy, other people would be doing it. Mm-hmm. And this work is so meaningful to me despite the difficulty, because when I'm able to help someone to step up and rise above and take some sense of control back in their life, and they see the progress, it makes it worth it. So you've got to find that thing for you.
I think you've just pointed to why we have the Great Resignation, or the Great Accelerated Resignation in healthcare, because people are maybe struggling with that why. So recognition can help anchor you. Self-recognition, recognition of others could be the why of today. So that may help you to get through your day, your shift, your week. So that's amazing. Where can people learn more about you and access the amazing books or resources that you have?
You can find me on my website. It's healthyworkforceinstitute.com.
Amazing. Thank you, Renee, for choosing to get up every single day and live your why. The world needs your greatness. And I'm so, so appreciative of your time today. Stay safe. And thank you for choosing nursing. And even though it has evolved many forms, so grateful to you. And thank you all for what you're doing to make your workplace and your organization better too. Take care. Bye-bye.